All right, welcome. Today, we are diving into some really fascinating research on how video games affect the brain. And this is especially for all of you educators out there, the ones shaping the minds of our next generation. We're going to unpack what the science actually says, and I promise you, some of the results are, well, they're probably not what you're expecting. So let's kick things off with a little thought experiment. When I say video game player, who do you picture? Just get a clear image in your mind. You got it? For a lot of people, it's probably a kid, right? Maybe a teenager just glued to a screen. Well, the thing is, the reality of gaming today is so much bigger and, honestly, more woven into our culture than most of us think. That classic image we all have in our heads, it's pretty out of date. So get this, you're looking at the average age of a video game player today. It's not 8, it's not 18, it's 33. Gaming isn't just a kid's hobby anymore. It's a massive part of our culture, and it cuts across all age groups, including, well, probably a lot of us. And the amount of sheer engagement here is it's staggering. In just one single month, players spent a combined 68,000 years playing one game. Just think about that. Imagine if we could harness even a tiny fraction of that focus for learning. But of course, with that much time on screen, there are some real concerns. So let's talk about those. Now, as educators, I know you've heard all the warnings about the downsides, and rightly so. So before we get into any of the surprising benefits, let's just tackle the two biggest, most common worries about video games head-on. Okay, this one is a classic. It's probably the oldest one in the book, right? It's something many of us heard growing up about pretty much any screen, from the living room TV to the first computer in the classroom. And then there's this one, the big one. This is a huge concern for anyone in the classroom. It's the fear that all these fast-paced games are rewiring kids' brains to be distracted, unable to focus on schoolwork. These are totally valid concerns. But what if we stopped relying on just conventional wisdom? What happens when researchers take these exact questions into the lab to measure the real, actual impact of gaming on our brains? Well, what they found is not at all what you'd think. In fact, the findings are pretty game-changing. They have some major implications for how we think about cognitive training and maybe even rehabilitation. Talk about flipping a myth on its head. This research shows that, far from damaging eyesight, playing action games actually seems to improve it. We're talking superior vision. Action gamers get better at picking out details in a cluttered scene and can actually distinguish more shades of gray, which, is a pretty useful skill if you're driving in a thick fog. Okay, let's try a quick test right now. I want you to look at the screen and say the color of the ink, not the word that you're reading. Go for it. So what happens when you put action gamers through this exact test? Well, it turns out they consistently outperform pretty much everyone else. Their brains resolve that mental conflict faster and with way less effort. It's a clear sign of a more efficient, more powerful attention system. And here's another great example of that attention boost. Most of us, we can track about 3, maybe 4 moving objects at the same time. But a seasoned action gamer, they can track 6, sometimes even 7. I mean, just think about how crucial a skill like that is for driving in heavy traffic or playing a team sport. So the big question is, why? Why does this happen? These aren't just little party tricks. These are signs of real, measurable changes happening in the brain's actual wiring. So let's peek under the hood at the neuroscience. And brain imaging gives us the answer. It turns out that these 3 core networks, basically the command and control centers for our attention, become way more efficient in people who play action games. It's almost like playing these games is taking your brain to the gym for a high-intensity workout. And this leads to something that is, well, it's really surprising. You'd think all heavy tech users would be good at multitasking, right? Well, it turns out action gamers are great at switching between tasks. But another group, the people who are always juggling music and web browsing and texting, they think they're great at it, but in lab tests, researchers said they were absolutely abysmal. It just goes to show you, not all screen time is created equal. This brings up a really great analogy. The key seems to be about the dose and the content. Binging is never good for you, but in the right amounts, some games seem to have these active ingredients that are really beneficial for the brain, kind of like how certain molecules in a glass of red wine can be good for your health. Okay, but here's the classic chicken or the egg question. Do the games cause these improvements, or are people who already have better attention just drawn to these games in the first place? To prove it's causal, researchers ran training studies. They took people who don't play games and had them play action games for a specific amount of time. And the results were a slam dunk. The non-gamers showed huge improvements in their cognitive skills after that training. But here's the kicker. Those improvements were still there when they were tested again 5 months later. This shows a powerful, long-lasting effect. This could be a real tool for education, not just some temporary boost. So, where does all this leave us? Now that we know this potential exists, what's the path forward? Especially for those of us in education. What's the next big step? I love this quote because it just perfectly captures the problem we've had for years. A lot of so-called educational games feel exactly like this, like broccoli that someone just dipped in a thin layer of chocolate. They're built for learning first, and fun is a distant second. And you know what? Kids can tell. They just aren't that engaging. So the future, the goal, is to create a whole new kind of chocolate. The idea is to design games that are genuinely fun, totally irresistible on their own, but are built from the ground up with these powerful brain-boosting mechanics that science is now starting to understand. You know, this research really opens the door to a new way of thinking about learning. What if we could harness the most powerful engagement engine on the planet for actual cognitive growth? Just imagine that for a second. That's a future that's absolutely worth building. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.